Hello, this is IPO Swords, and today is day 7 and our final day of a week of small swords. Today we're looking at a model of 1934 or Wzór 34 sword from Poland. This is a diplomatic corps sword, and they're still in use today. I'll roll over some images of them being presented right now. The last one I know of was presented in 2014. However, this example is from 1983, as is marked on the ricasso and on the back of the grip. I'm hesitant to even call this a small sword, however that is the closest in form factor. However, the blade is decidedly similar to a spadroon. Let me bring it close to the camera and we can examine it a little better. As you can see, the form factor of this sword is not of a typical small sword. However, some of the typical features are still there. The pommel is fairly unremarkable, and the grip is rectangular in section. The earlier model of 1926 had opal, or mother of pearl rather, handle scales. You can see the manufacturer's stamp here on the ricasso and on the grip, which says R. Kus 1983, Warszawa. Ryszard Kus, whose son is Bogdan Kus and still makes swords, has been making swords since the early 20th century. I have quite a few of his items. As you can see, there is about 40% gilding remaining, most of it on the eagle. Where it has been held, on the grip, is quite worn out. I'm sure if I was inclined to, I could find out precisely who this had been presented to. However, this is normally inscribed on the scabbard right here, which I do not have. I'll roll over some footage where you can see exactly that. I'm not sure how well you can see it, but the blade is etched. A floral motif and a Polish eagle. It's rather hard to capture in this light as the frost etching is fairly shallow. This sword weighs 580 grams and has a single-edged double-fullered blade, which is almost sharp. Its thickness at the spine is about 5.5 millimeters, and it tapers more heavily in this section and is about 3 millimeters here, 2 millimeters here, and just over 1 millimeter here. It is therefore fairly flexible in the first section. This sword is 93 centimeters long in total, with a 17 centimeter long handle. The guard is neither bilobate nor clamshell in design, and when held edge down, the eagle is on the outside, much like you'd see on court swords with their clamshell guards. There are very few of these swords, and all of them were presented to politicians. The pre-war ones are particularly rare and valuable, however this one is obviously from 1983 and significantly post-war. That being said, they are very unusual and rare to find on the collector's market, and very little is known about them. Very little is known about these swords, and it's hard to come by any details. However, what I can say about the maker is that Ryszard Kus worked with Wojciech Zabłocki on the project to design the 1796 cavalry and marine officers' swords for the Polish army. Likewise, they've been manufacturing these for quite a while. The double-fullered blade, whilst for a completely ceremonial purpose, is fairly substantial, and the balance point is quite far out. Given the fact that this is a solid bronze handle, this does indicate this blade is somewhat more substantial than the other swords I've seen, and that's corroborated by the higher weight, almost 700 grams. The Polish eagle on the handle of this sword still bears a Polish crown, regardless of the fact that this was made in 1983, whilst under communist rule, where the crowned eagle was not commonly seen. It was obviously overlooked on these swords. However, on items like the Virtuti Militari medal, you will see there is no crown on the head of the eagle. If we contrast it to my other spadroon, this one being a German model from 1900, you can see that the blade is substantially wider. The double fullers are both fairly shallow, so there is more steel in the blade, even in this profile, not only in width, compared to this single and fairly deep fuller. The blade also has a substantially thicker spine, all the way along, and there is a similar amount of weight in the hilt, although this may have marginally more. Regardless, this was not a weapon intended to see any combat use, but it was made in a time where Polish sword designs were attempting to harken back to an older day. In 1934, we see 1934 patent Szpada, which is very similar to earlier 19th and 18th century hussars swords. The 1976 Szpada, which I mentioned later, is even more similar to early 18th century hussars swords, particularly Hungarian and Austrian swords. However, these were used all over that part of Europe. The earlier opal-handled version of this sword is extremely rare and was produced only between 1926 and 1934. If you ever see one, please contact me, as I'd be very interested in buying it. That's all for today. Until next time, stay sharp. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel, leave a like, and leave a comment.